I'm Janice Chung. I'm a Korean-American photographer based in Queens, New York City. I grew up in Queens all my life, and much of my work focuses on family and the Korean community here in New York. So I grew up in Queens. I was born in Flushing Hospital, like a lot of Asian kids from Queens. And I grew up pretty much adjacent to Flushing. My grandmother lived in Flushing. And I remember running errands with my mom constantly as a kid. I would go to the local YWCA, go to the Korean Hagwon, Korean school there. I went to church. So basically my life was surrounded by the Korean community. But sadly, I somehow can't really speak Korean, which is funny. And it wasn't until I think I went to college that I realized that I was different because everybody around me looked like me, spoke the same language, spoke Korean, spoke English. I didn't really feel like I stuck out, but it was when I went to college that I realized, oh, I am this other person and I have this identity that's different from my peers. And I think that's when I started investigating more deeply about my heritage and my culture. So I started photography in high school. It was around the time when Facebook was becoming a big thing, and everybody was obsessed with sharing their profile, their photos, and social media was like such a presence in our lives. And I remember also that digital point-and-shoot cameras were really popular at the time, and everybody had one except me, and I just felt this itch. Like I wanted to express myself using one of these cameras too, and so I remember going to Target with my mom, doing zero research, but just picked like the prettiest camera essentially. And so I had this like lavender color Kodak point and shoot, and that was like my camera that I loved dearly and used for many years, and that's why I started photography. And I decided that I wanted to go to SVA. And it was difficult because we couldn't afford it, but we just somehow made it work, and yeah, that's how I started. And I've been doing photography since school. It's been a very slow but steady journey. I think I'm not a super business-minded person, and so I think I slowly worked on personal projects throughout the years from school up to this point, and somehow serendipitously it's led me to small shows here and there, and I've been able to get work simply just like people have seen my work on social media. So I feel pretty lucky where I've ended up, despite not being super I didn't walk into photography as a career like super head on. I just kind of like floated around, and yeah, I'm here doing photography still. So I've always actually wanted to photograph Flushing ever since college. I remember the first time I photographed in Flushing, I was a student and I just walked into a couple of businesses, sometimes photographing secretly, sometimes asking when I felt comfortable, but I just didn't have like the right frame of mind, the skill, the confidence level when I was like 19 or 20. But in the back of my mind, Flushing was something I've wanted to do because it's like the place where I pretty much grew up. And then it wasn't until right before the pandemic where it was the right time for me to start. And so the purpose of the project initially was to photograph the businesses that had been around for a long period of time. So the businesses I prioritized were like the ones that had been around for 20 or 30 or 40 years if I could find them. And really the project started as a love letter to my community, the people that essentially raised me and were part of my childhood. And I felt this sense of urgency because so much of Flushing is changing now, and it isn't what it was when I was a kid, when Union Street, Main Street, Roosevelt Avenue is filled with Korean businesses, and now you don't see that anymore. And there's, the Korean sector of Flushing is still pretty prominent, but it's just spread out, and it's really not the same. And I just had this longing to connect with these business owners who I admire and respect. And I was also just really curious, like, what are their lives like? And as a second generation person, I felt like they reminded me so much of my parents. And so that was also another interest point for me. I think what was reinforced with photographing Flushing was that I learned how valuable Flushing is to the surrounding community. Without the community, these businesses will suffer, and without these businesses, the community will have nowhere to go. And so there is this delicate dance between service and care that exist here, and I'm interested in that relationship between the community and businesses and how we coexist. Without each other, we can't survive. And I think that's true for all ethnic enclaves and all small communities with local businesses like this. I don't think it necessarily changed my view of Flushing. I think it just sort of opened my eyes to what I already knew, which was that the struggle of these business owners, it's, they feel the struggle day to day, and as the person that's on the receiving end, sometimes I forget, like, there's a face to these business owners, these businesses, and they have families, they have lives, they have bills to pay, and sometimes they have really terrible customers, and it's nice to put a face to these businesses that I've either passed by or frequented throughout my life, and just to connect with them on a deeper level, get to know, like, what is their history and how does it relate to the business that they do was really a privilege for me. And so, yeah, it just made me appreciate the community much more on a deeper level. So when I first started, I would look for the businesses that are the ones I frequented the most, or the ones that I knew had been around for the longest. That was my priority. And so I remember the first business I photographed was actually this bar that is very popular amongst kids my age and kids older than me. It was called Tikgormok. It's actually no longer in existence anymore. Yeah, I don't know why we picked that one, but it was our first one, and he was so scary looking at first, and he ended up being an incredibly warm and kind person. And so, yeah, so the older businesses and the ones that I knew about first, but the other businesses that I ended up having a part of my project, a lot of them I actually had never seen before, or I hadn't known about, and I was able to discover these businesses because I actually don't drive. So I would walk, take the bus, basically everywhere in Flushing, and I'd just find these businesses that nobody knew about unless, like, you lived on that specific street corner or whatever. The businesses I chose were people who were the most receptive to my project, because me being second gen and also not being able to speak Korean very well, it's really difficult to communicate my ideas. And so that was a big challenge. So whoever was open was whoever I chose to be in my project. But there were certain ones where even if they declined politely, there was just like, I just felt that I needed to have them in my project. And specifically, there was this one business called Crystal Cleaners. And when you enter this man's shop, it feels like you're entering like 1980s Korea. It just is a time capsule of like this other world. And he rejected me, 3 or 4 times. And so I was pretty persistent, and someone like him ended up saying yes, but there were others that had said no. So yeah, it was just this tug and pull of like, can you please be a part of my project? And sometimes they felt bad for me because I'm like this young girl and I'm walking around in like 90-degree weather, and they're just like, okay, fine. And sometimes I think they saw that I reminded them of their kids, and they saw that I was trying really earnestly as a second-gen kid to learn more about them. And I think that's pretty rare to find someone who frankly can't speak the language to approach them about their work and their history. And so, yeah. That's a good question, because I do think people find a lot of intimacy in my work when sometimes I look at my pictures and I find like I can't have any emotions because sometimes I've been looking at that photograph for too long. But I think I really value making connections through my photographs, and I feel like I've always been really bad with my words because I feel like it has to do with growing up as a latchkey kid, not having conversations around the dinner table. My parents were at work and I was bored all the time. And I think because of that, I've always been interested in people and making connections through photographs, because it was like, it's almost like a way, like I can escape into my photographs, but it's almost too much to just have a face-to-face conversation. And so I think perhaps that's why the images feel intimate, because it's almost like I'm having a relationship with this person, but using my camera. And yeah, if I didn't have a camera, would I be able to talk to these people? No, I don't think so. So it's a way in which I can have that relationship, I guess. I've always wanted to photograph Flushing ever since I started my photography journey. But I think because it's like the place that I frequent, where I live, where I commute through, it's hard to kind of take a step back and see it as this like interesting place that should be documented. But again, because like Flushing is changing so quickly, and I remember on Union Street, they got rid of all of the old like 10, 20-year-old signs. And there are just some things that fit well into that period of time where I started, where I knew that I needed to get it done regardless of my own language barriers, my own culture barriers. I think, quite frankly, I was terrified to enter these spaces kind of blindly. They knew nothing about me, and I knew just the fact that they were these business owners, and that's it. But I think, as I mentioned before, I just had this deep desire and longing to get to know them, and I knew that photography would be my only way to get that through. And so, yeah, I think as a second gen, I feel like they won't accept me or they'll reject me, and I think that has a lot to do with my culture and my upbringing. But I knew that like if I don't do this now, I'm never gonna do it, and so that's kind of what propelled me to get this going, despite my personal fears and insecurities and cultural and language barriers. I don't think it's really changed the way I see my hometown. I think I just like, love and appreciate it on a deeper level. I definitely feel much more sense of urgency. Like when I'm in Flushing and I'm commuting through Flushing, I feel the sense of anxiety. Like I need to keep photographing because what if tomorrow that business down the block that I've been thinking about for months is gone? So that's probably what I feel now that's different. It's like this anxiety and this urgency. And yeah, I just want to continue this project, and that's really important to me. So it's ongoing, supposedly. So I actually started photographing my family with my mother. She was my first subject, and I still remember the first photograph I took of her. It was like this black and white image, and she was sitting on this ginormous sofa that, yeah, was just huge. And she was very stiff, and there was no connection between the two of us. And I don't know why I took that photo, but it was really bad. But since then, I think photography has actually helped our relationship. It's allowed us to get a lot closer because I'm always basically following her with my camera. And that was the start of me on my journey photographing my family. I think I photographed also my grandmother a lot before she passed. I was really interested in hanging out with her, and she was much older at the time. She was like in her late 90s. And so there wasn't much that we could do, and our interaction was very limited because of I can't speak Korean. But it was nice to share that time with her through photography. I don't know if I would have spent that time with her alone if I hadn't photographed her. Where Are You? It was kind of just really spontaneous for me. I didn't intend on it becoming this body of work. It was really just my interest in learning about my roots and my identity and who is my mom and who is my grandmother. I wanted to get to know them slightly on a deeper level, although not many words were exchanged with my grandmother. I still felt like just being in her presence and photographing her was enough for me. My work ended up becoming this project that was investigating my identity and my heritage and looking at the people who were closest to me, and that was my family in Flushing and my parents. I want to say for the most part it's just spontaneous. Like, I know that there's a good picture to be made, so I'll bring my camera, but I won't have my camera with the intent of like, I know I need this specific image. It's just more of like, oh, if the light's really pretty, or if I see this in-between moment while having an exchange with my aunt and she's like preparing us a bowl of fruit. So I don't really treat any work that is about my family with all too much seriousness. I just try to enjoy myself and my time, and if there's an image to be made, then I'll take it. But I feel like all of my work that revolves around my family is always like, I do it, and then once I have all the images, I kind of try to fit them together like a puzzle. And so, yeah. I think what I learned is that everything is temporary. My family is not going to be with me forever. My mom is not going to be around forever. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm photographing, that I want to remember these moments and our shared experiences. And I learned that I really need to be present, and I really need to take my time here now, because I feel like my mind is always in the past or it's in the future, and I'm not really here. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned. So using nostalgia as a way to look at my past, I think is interesting because it uncovers a lot of like personal history about my family and things I never knew about as a kid. And so sometimes that can be traumatic, and sometimes that can be painful. But I think that's just like the nature of nostalgia, is that not always is nostalgia this romantic idea of the past. It's also, it's like fraught with a lot of tension and fragmented histories, and that's what I am discovering more of as an adult, looking at my personal work about my family, is that not everything is picture perfect. There are things about my past that I romanticize in my head, and even now I look back and think fondly, but behind the scenes I realize, okay, there's other things that were happening here. But understanding those things, I think, will help me understand where I'm going, and I think it's important always to look back. I think home has a lot of layers. The word home has a lot of layers. It doesn't necessarily mean only a place. I think home also can be a feeling or a certain memory. For example, I will feel a sense of home when I'm at this restaurant and I'm eating this phenomenal meal, and it triggers a meal that I had in my recent memory or as a child, or it'll trigger a memory of someone cooking me a meal. And so, yeah, I don't really see home as just this one physical location. And do I see Flushing as my hometown? I do, but I also somehow see Korea as my home as well. I don't know why I see Korea as my home despite having grown up in Queens. There's something very familiar yet unfamiliar about being there. Everyone looks like you, everyone speaks Korean. These people on the street can be your family. A lot of second generation kids probably feel similar to me, where they return back to the so-called motherland and they feel like, oh, this is where I belong, and yet you're so different from these people who look like you. I also think that I feel like Korea is my home because I am an extension of my mother, who has a lot of memories in Korea, and I think her experiences deeply influence me. And whenever I'm there with my mom, there's just something that I can't really explain that I feel and that she feels mutually. So yeah. I'm not sure if this is an ongoing project for me. My project about my family in Where Are You I feel like has come to a close with my grandmother passing. I think she was like, the matriarch of the family, and she was the reason why we all gathered at like the kunjip. And now with us, the cousins and all the kids, we're all grown up, everyone has kids except for me, and everyone's married, and we're moving on with our lives, and that isn't to say that we can't still be close. But it's just different, and I think that's kind of natural for families to kind of move on into their other journeys, and I'm just on my own now. I think the biggest difference that I felt was that the Koreatown in LA has such a deep and long history, and Emmanuel was able to find people that have been around for like 40 years or something like that. And the history in Flushing is a lot shorter, and the turnaround is much quicker. And so for the most part, I found people that had been around since like the IMF crisis, so about 20 years ago. And then the people who were there before, I realized much of them are retired, or they're like in Long Island now and they're no longer in Flushing. So that was really interesting to see how Flushing is a Koreatown, but it's very much just a temporary moment right now in this place and time. And Flushing is not just for Koreans, or it's not a Koreatown only, and it doesn't belong to just Koreans. It belongs to everyone, and whoever is here in this time period will take a stake, and if they're not there, then we're moving on. And that, I think, is kind of the beauty of this project, is that I'm photographing just a small snapshot of Flushing, and it might be gone tomorrow, it might be gone in 10 years, who knows? And I want to make sure I document that before it's gone. I think I'm constantly inspired by the people and subjects and the places that are most closest to me. So my family, my mother, Flushing, those are heavy inspirations on me. And I think I'm always just interested in learning more about the Korean community here, whether it be these business owners or whether it be my family members. I think I'm just drawn to connecting with my roots and where I come from, and all these people and places are also parts of my past, and I like investigating that. I like to learn more about my past, as I mentioned before, and it helps me to just see clearer. I think it's always difficult and a challenge to balance personal work with editorial or commercial work. Sometimes, one project can overwhelm the other, and finding a balance between them time-wise has always been difficult for me, but I feel like for whatever reason things kind of just naturally fall into place. Maybe it's because I am consistent with shooting personal work and making sure that I feed my creative soul in a sense, and that has always been a priority. And I think when people are looking for photographers, they always want to see somebody who has a strong sense of personal style and strong personal projects, and I think that was the one thing that I did in all my years of photography, is work on that. I think the commonality between both working commercially and personally, I think, is that I have a very specific sense of style. I like to shoot from a very personal lens. I like to create an intimate setting with my subjects, and I think when editors or whoever are looking at my work, they're drawn to that, and so I borrow from my personal style and bring that into my commercial work. I would say that I do approach my commercial work with the same sensibility, and I try to treat all my subjects with the amount of care and love that I do with my family or with my Koreatown subjects. Yeah. I feel like when it comes to my personal work, I never really know what I'm doing. It just, as I mentioned, it's just like a giant puzzle piece, and I'm just trying to fit the pieces together. But I've always been interested in photographing young Korean women, and that's something I worked on since I was younger. So maybe that's what I do next, but who knows? I don't consider myself a person with super serious plans. Maybe that's a problem, but I just enjoy kind of going with the flow. So I think I probably will always stay in Queens. I am obsessed with Queens. I feel like there's still so much to learn in this borough. I mean, it's huge and there's so many different kinds of people and culture, and I feel like I've only seen like 0.5% of it. And I just love discovering the amazing things in this borough, whether it be Koreatown and Flushing, or whether it be like Elmhurst or Jackson Heights or whatever. So I think I'm gonna stay, and I don't see myself leaving.